The low hum of the table saw was usually therapy for Elias Thorne, the rhythmic thrum of familiar heartbeat in his workshop, but not today. Today, it was a dull throb mirroring the one behind his eyes, a relentless echo of the email notification that had landed moments ago. Urgent community meeting regarding rezoning proposal. Your attendance is mandatory. Mandatory? Of course. Everything was mandatory when the Crestwood Valley Homeowners Association, or HOA, set their sights on something. Elias wiped sawdust from his brow, his gaze drifting from the intricate joinery he was perfecting on a custom oak desk to the sprawling, untamed acreage visible through the large glass doors of his converted barn. This land wasn't just dirt and trees. It was Thorne Homestead, a living testament to 6 generations of his family, a place where his grandfather had taught him the constellations and his father had shown him how to coax wood into art. It was his sanctuary, his canvas, his legacy. Selling it, or letting it be carved up for another soulless tract of McMansions, was unthinkable. The community hall reeked of stale coffee and desperation. Elias sat at the back, his arms crossed, watching Theresa Vance glide to the podium. Theresa, with her perfectly coiffed blonde bob and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, was the HOA president, but more accurately, she was the face of Harmony Developments, the corporate entity salivating over Elias's untouched 20 acres. She spoke of progress, of community enrichment, of maximizing property values, all thinly veiled euphemisms for concrete, density, and profit. Her words, slick and rehearsed, painted a picture of Elias's land, an underutilized asset, a blight on their meticulously manicured suburban utopia. Maps flickered on the projector, showing his wild, ancient woods replaced by a grid of identical houses, a new shopping center, and worst of all, a towering, centralized clubhouse. The proposal was blatant. His land, rezoned from agricultural, residential, to high-density commercial, residential, for their benefit, not his. When the floor opened for questions, Elias felt the collective gaze of his neighbors, some curious, some openly hostile, many just weary. They'd bought into Crestwood Valley's promise of uniformity and controlled growth, and Elias's stubbornly preserved wilderness was an anomaly. Mr. Thorne, Theresa's voice, saccharine sweet, cut through the murmurs. Perhaps you can enlighten us on why you refuse to cooperate with this beneficial development. It truly is for the good of all homeowners. Elias stood, his voice, usually calm, laced with a tremor of steel. This land is my home. It's been my family's home for over a century. It's not an asset to be maximized, Ms. Vance. It's history. It's nature. It's sacred. A ripple went through the crowd, quickly silenced by Theresa's tight smile. Sacred land doesn't pay HOA dues, Mr. Thorne, she countered, the sugar coating on her words dissolving into acid. Nor does it contribute to property values. We're prepared to move forward with, or without your cooperation. Be advised, the board has authorized legal proceedings to ensure compliance. The veiled threat hung heavy in the air, a gauntlet thrown. Over the next few weeks, the pressure intensified. Anonymous flyers appeared in mailboxes, depicting Elias's property as an overgrown, dangerous wilderness, a breeding ground for pests and a fire hazard. There were passive-aggressive emails about unsightly conditions and potential zoning violations. His utilities were suddenly subject to routine inspections that felt anything but routine, their timing suspiciously coinciding with major workshop deadlines. One evening, he found a surveyor's stake driven into his back acreage, far beyond the easement, clearly marking boundaries that weren't theirs. When he confronted the surveyor, a nervous young man, he merely mumbled about HOA directives and hurried away. Elias yanked the stake out, the metal cold and defiant in his hand. As he did, his boots scraped against something unusual. Not just dirt, not just rock, but a vein of material that glinted faintly, catching the last rays of sunlight with an almost unnatural luminescence. It was embedded in the darker earth, a metallic sheen Elias couldn't quite place. He knelt, brushing, Away loose soil, revealing a small patch of what looked like silvery gold flecks, unlike any rock he'd seen in the area's granite and shale. He picked up a small fragment. It felt denser than it looked, cool to the touch. He put the fragment in his pocket, dismissing it as some common mineral, probably iron pyrite, fool's gold, just a strange bit of rock. His mind was consumed with the escalating war with the HOA. He spent hours poring over legal documents, contacting property rights lawyers, and researching every avenue to defend his home. Yet, in quiet moments, while working in the shop or walking the familiar trails, his eyes would instinctively scan the ground. He started noticing more of the strange glints, particularly near the old creek bed that cut through his property, or embedded in the exposed earth where recent heavy rains had caused minor erosion. Once, while clearing brush near an ancient, gnarled oak, he unearthed a small, strangely symmetrical stone that felt impossibly smooth and cool, almost too perfect to be natural, flecked with the same subtle, enigmatic shimmer. He shrugged, thinking it was just a peculiar geological curiosity, a distraction from the real fight. But these little observations, these subtle glimmers of something unexplained on his land, began to accumulate, like breadcrumbs leading into a deepening forest. They nestled in the back of his mind, an irritating, persistent whisper beneath the roar of the HOA's increasingly aggressive campaign, a campaign that was about to push him to his very limits. He just didn't know then that those limits would lead him not to despair, but to a revelation that would shake his world, and possibly theirs, to its very foundations. The small, metallic fragment Elias had pocketed from his land became an unwelcome companion, a constant, irritating presence. In his thoughts, it sat on his workbench beside a half-finished dovetail joint, catching the light in a way no ordinary stone should. He tried to dismiss it, to focus solely on the legal battle raging with the HOA, but the subtle glint was a persistent whisper, demanding attention. The more Theresa Vance and her Harmony Development's cronies intensified their pressure, the more Elias found himself drawn to the unusual. The smear campaign escalated, portraying him in the local online forums as an uncooperative hermit, a detriment to property values, even a potential environmental risk from maintaining uninspected natural acreage. There were increasingly aggressive certified letters demanding access for environmental assessments and boundary clarifications, each one thinly veiled intimidation. Yet, instead of breaking him, their relentless attacks seemed to sharpen his resolve, making him even more unwilling to surrender his family's legacy, and by extension, the strange secrets it might hold. One evening, after another draining call with his lawyer, who advised him, yet again, to consider a reasonable settlement, Elias found himself gravitating towards the oldest part of his property, a crumbling stone foundation that hinted at an even earlier dwelling, predating his grandfather's farmhouse. Here, the ground seemed to hum with an ancient silence. He ran his hand over the weathered stones, then knelt, scraping at the earth near a moss-covered boulder. The same silvery gold flecks were there, more abundant now, interspersed with streaks of a deep, almost indigo blue. This wasn't pyrite. This felt different, heavier, more luminous. His initial reluctance to investigate evaporated, replaced by a nascent, unshakable curiosity. He needed answers. His first stop was the county archives, a dusty, cavernous building that smelled of old paper and forgotten stories. He spent days poring over deeds, land grants, and geological surveys dating back to the late 1800s. Most of it was mundane, but then he found it, a brittle, hand-drawn map from 1903, tucked into a surveyor's ledger, marking his property boundaries with curious annotations. In faded ink, near the creek bed, someone had scrawled a symbol Elias couldn't decipher, next to the words vein, uncharted, exceptional density, uncharted. Exceptional density, the words echoed in his mind. He photographed the map with his phone, the grainy image a digital ghost of a forgotten secret. The more he dug, the deeper the rabbit hole went. He visited the local historical society, a small museum run by an eccentric, sharp-witted woman named Agnes Periwinkle. Agnes, with her spectacles perched on her nose and her fingers stained with ink, had been the town's unofficial historian for 50 years. When Elias hesitantly showed her the photograph of the map, her eyes, usually twinkling with amusement, narrowed. "Ah, the Thorne tract," she mused, her voice a dry rustle. "They were whispers, back in my grandfather's day. Old man Thorne, your great-great-grandfather, he was a peculiar one, kept to himself, always seemed to have enough coin, despite never leaving his farm. Said he had a lucky patch on his land." She paused, peering at the symbol. This looks like a prospector's mark. For something rare, something deeper." Agnes couldn't pinpoint the exact mineral, but her anecdotes painted a picture of Elias's ancestor protecting a secret, subtly enriching himself without drawing undue attention. The pieces were starting to fit, but the complete picture remained frustratingly out of reach. Back at the homestead, the HOA's tactics grew nastier. A formal notice of intent to condemn his property for eminent domain purposes arrived, citing vague public good clauses, anonymous, threatening phone calls became more frequent, always hanging up when Elias answered. Once, he found his workshop door ajar, though nothing appeared to be missing, leaving an unsettling chill in the air. Their desperation was palpable, a sign that Harmony Developments was pushing hard from behind the scenes. Elias felt a profound sense of isolation. His neighbors, once cordial, now averted their eyes or offered terse greetings, clearly swayed by the HOA's propaganda. Yet, the intensifying pressure only fueled his quiet obsession. The strange shimmer on his land, the cryptic map, Agnes's whispers, they solidified into an undeniable truth. His property held something extraordinary. He began taking samples, carefully extracting small portions of the strange material from various points on his land. The deeper he dug, even just a few inches, the more prevalent the silvery gold and indigo veins became. They weren't isolated pockets. They appeared to be part of a vast, interconnected network just beneath the surface. He bought a basic mineral identification kit online, and though he lacked the expertise for definitive analysis, the preliminary tests were baffling. The material didn't react as expected for common metals or minerals. It possessed an unusual hardness, a peculiar magnetic resonance, and a weight that belied its appearance. His mind raced. Could it be some undiscovered alloy, a rare earth element? He thought back to Agnes's words. Something rare. Something deeper. The clues were no longer subtle whispers. They were coalescing into a chorus, leading him towards an astonishing, potentially life-altering revelation, one that Theresa Vance and the entire Crestwood Valley HOA were utterly, blindly, tragically unaware of. The tension was building, not just between Elias and the HOA, but within Elias himself, as the true nature of his stubborn defense began to emerge from the very earth beneath his feet. He knew, deep in his gut, that he was on the brink of discovering something truly monumental. The small mineral fragments Elias had collected sat on his kitchen table, each one a silent question mark. He'd taken photos, researched labs, and finally found an independent geological testing service 2 states away, discreet and expensive. The waiting had been agony, a constant hum beneath the surface of his daily life, punctuated by the HOA's increasingly aggressive maneuvers. Theresa Vance, now openly hostile, had escalated from thinly veiled threats to outright harassment. A bulldozer, emblazoned with Harmony Developments' logo, had appeared on the adjacent HOA-owned lot, its roaring engine running for hours each day, a deliberate sonic assault. There were spurious noise complaints filed against his workshop, and even a strange incident where his mail delivery was mysteriously interrupted for several days. Elias felt like a besieged fort, but the growing anticipation of the lab results kept him defiant, a quiet fire burning amidst the siege. Then, the email arrived. The subject line was nondescript. Lab results. Case #CV739. Double quotes. Elias's hands trembled slightly as he clicked it open. The technical jargon initially swam before his eyes. Spectroscopy, X-ray diffraction, elemental composition. But then, a few words leapt out, bolded, underlined, screaming off the screen: unprecedented purity, massive scale, rare earth element, deposit, thorium-rich. Thorium, not just any mineral, a highly valuable, radioactive, yet safe and efficient element, increasingly vital for next-generation nuclear power, medical isotopes, and advanced electronics. Elias felt the blood drain from his face, then rush back in a dizzying wave. Disbelief, wired with a sudden, exhilarating awe, he looked from the screen to his window, out at his ordinary, unassuming land, now transformed in his mind into a silent vault of unimaginable wealth. The scale described was staggering, not pockets, not veins, but an estimated deposit spanning nearly 80% of his 20 acres, reaching significant depths, valued not in millions, but potentially billions of dollars. Billions. Elias, the solitary woodworker, sat on a fortune. A profound sense of fear mingled with exhilaration. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a destiny. While Elias grappled with his newfound secret, the HOA, oblivious to the geological gold mine beneath his feet, ramped up their assault. Theresa Vance, her patience clearly worn thin, called a snap HOA meeting, specifically targeting Elias. Her voice, amplified by crackling speakers, boomed through the poorly insulated walls of his workshop from the community center, just a few hundred yards away. Mr. Thorne's continued obstruction, she declared, her tone sharp as a carving knife, is now costing every homeowner. Harmony Developments is prepared to offer a substantial sum to the HOA if this rezoning passes by the end of the month. Mr. Thorne's land is holding us all back. She painted him as selfish, unneighborly, even anti-progress. The meeting culminated in a vote to initiate a lawsuit seeking an injunction against Elias for impeding community development and devaluing property. They even discussed imposing daily fines. Elias listened, a wry, almost manic grin spreading across his face. They wanted to fine him for land worth billions. The dramatic irony was so thick, he could almost taste it. Their desperation was hilariously misguided. The revelation of the thorium deposit was a secret weapon, but a dangerous one. Elias spent sleepless nights poring over geology reports, market analyses, and legal precedents concerning mineral rights. He quickly learned that in his state, surface rights and mineral rights were often separate. His family had owned the land outright, meaning they almost certainly held the mineral rights too. But how to leverage this without inciting a feeding frenzy? Revealing it prematurely would invite not just the HOA's continued aggression, but the attention of massive corporations, government agencies, and even less savory characters. This was no longer just about preserving his home, it was about protecting an incalculable asset. He realized his simple woodworking life was over. He had to become a strategist, a chess master, against opponents who didn't even know the game had changed. His internal conflict raged. Should he simply reveal the truth and watch the HOA collapse in collective shock and greed? The satisfaction would be immense. But then what? His peaceful sanctuary would become a mining operation, a scarred landscape, a constant battleground. Or should he continue to fight them quietly, strategically using his knowledge without exposing the full extent of the deposit? He decided on the latter. He needed to buy time, to understand the landscape of mineral extraction, to find the right allies. He started subtly changing his approach with his lawyer, asking pointed questions about the limits of HOA power, about eminent domain loopholes, about undisclosed factors that might influence land value. His lawyer, a seasoned but conventional man, looked at him strangely, accustomed to Elias's focus on historical preservation, not complex legal maneuvers regarding geological assets. But Elias simply smiled, a new glint in his eye. The fight was no longer just defensive, it was offensive. He held the trump card, a silent, glittering ace hidden beneath his feet, waiting for the perfect moment to be played, poised to shatter the HOA's carefully constructed world and redraw the very map of Crestwood Valley. The battle for Thorne Homestead had just begun, and the HOA had no idea what they were truly up against. Armed with the knowledge of the thorium deposit, Elias Thorne's quiet defiance solidified into a calculated strategic assault. He still hadn't revealed the full truth to his lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a cautious man who favored negotiation over confrontation. Instead, Elias began to guide him with leading questions, subtly shifting their defense. Mr. Henderson, Elias would ponder during their calls, what if there were undisclosed factors affecting my property's value, things a standard assessment wouldn't pick up? Henderson would pause, clearly baffled by Elias's sudden foray into abstract hypotheticals, but he diligently researched the angles, inadvertently preparing for a fight he didn't yet understand. Elias began to subtly stonewall the HOA's demands for property access, citing obscure privacy clauses and the need for comprehensive independent evaluations of his own before any land use discussions could proceed. It was a delaying tactic, but one backed by the quiet confidence of billions buried beneath his feet. The HOA, spearheaded by Theresa Vance, quickly sensed a shift. Elias was no longer just a stubborn old man, he was becoming an unpredictable obstacle. Harmony Developments, growing impatient, decided to bring in heavier artillery. A sleek, black SUV with tinted windows began to appear outside HOA meetings, and a new figure, Mr. Sterling, a corporate litigator known for his ruthless efficiency, emerged as Theresa's shadow. Sterling was all sharp suits and colder smiles, his questions pointed, his threats thinly veiled. He initiated a public relations blitz, distributing flyers that not only maligned Elias, but also emphasized the potential loss of economic prosperity for the entire Crestwood Valley community due to one individual's obstruction. They even hinted at environmental negligence on Elias's property, suggesting it could be a hazardous site if not properly managed by a responsible developer. Elias knew he needed more than just a lawyer. He needed an edge, a different kind of ally. His breakthrough came unexpectedly. During one of his visits to the county archives, he noticed a young woman, Maya Rodriguez, furiously typing on a laptop, surrounded by stacks of historical newspapers. Maya was a tenacious freelance investigative journalist for a small, independent, online news collective known for uncovering local corruption. She'd been covering the rising tensions between the HOA and residents, drawn by the scent of a story. Elias, seeing her determined focus, decided to take a calculated risk. He approached her, not with the full truth, but with enough intriguing breadcrumbs to hook her. He shared snippets of the 1903 map, hinted at strange historical anecdotes Agnes Periwinkle had mentioned, and presented the escalating harassment he faced. Maya's eyes, sharp and intelligent, lit up. This wasn't just a property dispute. It was a deeper narrative of corporate greed versus individual rights, with a hint of untold secrets. She started attending HOA meetings, her presence a silent, unsettling challenge to Theresa Vance. The entrance of Maya into the fray immediately caused a tremor. Her articles, meticulously researched and sharply written, didn't directly accuse, but skillfully questioned the HOA's motives, the transparency of Harmony Development's dealings, and the aggressive tactics employed against Elias. They resonated with a growing faction of disaffected homeowners who were tired of the HOA's heavy-handed control. One such homeowner was Mrs. Gable, a sweet-faced, formidable woman who had secretly resented the HOA's overreach for years. Inspired by Maya's reporting and Elias's quiet stand, Mrs. Gable began quietly rallying support among her neighbors, collecting signatures for a petition demanding greater transparency from the HOA board. It was a small, crucial alliance. The stakes escalated dramatically. Elias's initial plan to subtly leverage his knowledge became harder to maintain. Sterling, sensing Maya's digging, responded by hiring a private investigator, a shadowy figure who began trailing Elias, photographing his movements, and even attempting to access his workshop. One night, Elias heard faint noises outside his property line, near where he'd taken some of the deepest samples. He grabbed his old hunting rifle, the same one his father had taught him to shoot with, and ventured out. He found nothing but the distinct scent of fresh tobacco, a smell he didn't recognize from any local, lingered in the night air. The next day, one of his treasured, custom-built tables, left curing on his porch, was inexplicably vandalized, a deep, jagged gouge ruining its surface. It was a clear message. The fight was turning personal, dangerous. The loop of the conflict became a frantic dance. The HOA would push. Elias would parry with a legal maneuver or a new detail leaked to Maya. Sterling would tighten the screws, only for Mrs. Gable's quiet resistance to stir up community dissent. Just when Elias felt his resources stretched thin, a new piece of information from Maya or a sudden loophole discovered by Henderson would give him renewed hope. The dramatic irony was ever present. The HOA continued to fight for land they considered undeveloped or problematic, while Elias held the literal key to wealth beyond their wildest dreams. He walked a razor's edge, balancing the need to protect his secret with the necessity of defending his home. The pressure was immense, but the quiet hum of the thorium deposit beneath his feet, a silent promise of untold power, gave him the strength to face the mounting threats, knowing that the final confrontation, where the hidden truth would finally explode into the open, was rapidly approaching. The air in the Crestwood Valley Community Hall was electric, thick with anticipation and simmering hostility. This was it, the final, expedited hearing on the HOA's lawsuit to condemn Elias Thorne's property. Theresa Vance, flanked by Mr. Sterling and a phalanx of Harmony Development's legal team, exuded an icy confidence. They believed victory was within their grasp. Elias sat beside Mr. Henderson, whose face was etched with a mixture of concern and bewilderment, still unaware of the full hand Elias held. Maya Rodriguez was perched in the front row, camera poised, her eyes alight with journalistic fire. Mrs. Gable and a growing contingent of sympathetic homeowners filled the seats behind Elias, a silent show of solidarity against the HOA's relentless pressure. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense figure, called the hearing to order. Theresa Vance began with a polished, scathing attack on Elias, painting him as a selfish obstructionist holding back progress. Mr. Sterling followed, presenting reams of legal documents and expert testimonies, all designed to highlight the supposed blight of Elias's untouched land and the financial benefits Harmony Developments would bring. They detailed every alleged nuisance, every perceived violation, every fabricated slight. Elias watched impassively, a quiet storm brewing behind his eyes. When it was his turn, Mr. Henderson presented their defense, arguing for property rights and historical preservation, but it sounded weak against the HOA's aggressive onslaught. The judge seemed poised to rule, his gaze already drifting towards the closing statements. Then, Elias leaned forward, a subtle nod to Mr. Henderson. "Your Honor," Elias began, his voice calm but resonant, cutting through the strained silence. "Before we conclude, there's a vital piece of evidence that profoundly impacts this property's true value and, indeed, the very foundation of this case." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Theresa Vance scoffed. Sterling adjusted his tie, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "And what, pray tell, might that be, Mr. Thorne?" the judge asked, his patience wearing thin. Elias didn't answer directly. Instead, he signaled to Maya Rodriguez, who, with a practiced hand, connected a tablet to the hall's projector. The screen, moments before displaying Harmony Development's glossy renders, flickered. Then, it showed a series of high-resolution geological survey images, cross-sections of subterranean rock, glowing with unnatural colors. A collective gasp rippled through the room. On screen, a vivid, glowing blue and silver vein snake through layers of earth beneath Thorne Homestead. Accompanying text, projected in stark white, detailed the incredible findings. Thorne Homestead, estimated thorium deposit, extent, approx. 16.5 acres, purity, unprecedented, projected value, $8.7 billion, billions. The word hung in the air. A hammer blow. Theresa Vance's face went ashen, her meticulously coiffed hair suddenly seeming askew. Mr. Sterling leapt to his feet, sputtering objections, demanding to know the source. Independent Geological Survey, Your Honor, Elias stated calmly, commissioned personally. The land they seek to rezone, deeming it undeveloped and a blight, sits on one of the largest, purest untapped thorium deposits in North America. Chaos erupted. Murmurs turned into shouts. The sheer scale of the revelation was too immense to process. Theresa Vance was visibly shaking, her composure shattered. The underutilized asset she so casually dismissed was a modern-day treasure chest. The judge, stunned, slammed his gavel repeatedly. Mr. Henderson, reeling, stared at Elias, a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension on his face. The public, who had followed Maya's reports, suddenly understood the true stakes, their outrage shifting from Elias to the HOA. Harmony Development's entire case, built on devaluing Elias's land, collapsed into a ludicrous farce. The consequences for the HOA and Harmony Developments were swift and devastating. The judge, furious at the apparent deception and the reckless attempt to condemn a property of such immense national significance, dismissed the lawsuit with prejudice. He launched an immediate investigation into the HOA's tactics and Harmony Development's potentially predatory practices. News helicopters, alerted by Maya Rodriguez's frantic live reports, descended on Crestwood Valley. Theresa Vance and Mr. Sterling were engulfed by a media frenzy, their faces plastered across national news as the story of the billion-dollar backyard went viral. Lawsuits from indignant homeowners who felt misled and manipulated began to pile up against the HOA board, leading to resignations, arrests, and the complete dissolution of the existing HOA structure. Harmony Developments faced a PR nightmare and a cascade of legal challenges, their reputation irrevocably tarnished. Elias Thorne stood firm amidst the maelstrom. His land was secure. The victory was profound, not just legally, but personally. It validated his intuition, his stubborn refusal to yield, and his deep, unshakable connection to the land his family had safeguarded for generations. The homestead, once merely a place of quiet work and cherished memories, was now also a symbol of resilience, a testament to the fact that true value often lies unseen, dismissed by those who only seek superficial gain. Elias knew his life would never be the same. The mineral deposit opened up a dizzying array of options, a future he hadn't dared to dream of. He could partner with ethical mining companies, fund cutting-edge research, or even establish a foundation to preserve natural lands and support sustainable energy. The implications for Crestwood Valley were immense. The sleepy suburban town was thrust onto the national stage. Economists predicted a boom, but also cautioned about the challenges of managing such a discovery. Developers, prospectors, and environmentalists descended upon the region. Elias, however, remained grounded. His first act, after the dust settled, was to walk his 20 acres, not with the eye of a prospector, but with the reverence of a guardian. He touched the bark of the ancient oak, felt the familiar earth beneath his feet, now imbued with a new, profound significance. The woodworking shop would still hum with the sound of saws and chisels, but perhaps now, the timber he shaped would carry the story of the land, a narrative of hidden wealth, unwavering resolve, and the unexpected triumph of a quiet man over a greedy system. His journey was far from over. It had just begun, the silent promise of the earth finally brought to light, forever changing his world.